This is part 4 of the viruses recorded lectures. There we go. All right. We learned that viruses can be naked or they can be surrounded, their capsid can be surrounded by an envelope. So let's see, it says animal viruses, unlike the viruses of plants and bacteria, do not have to penetrate a cell wall to gain access to the host cell. Because you remember from Bio 111, animal cells don't have a cell wall. So the viruses that infect animal cells, including human cells, don't have to penetrate a cell wall. So there are two ways that non-enveloped or naked animal viruses can enter cells. Um, First, you have to have attachment. So a protein in the capsid, a glycoprotein in the capsid, will bind to the viral receptor on the host cell. That's the attachment. And then the virus can be taken inside the cell via a vesicle, and that process would be receptor-mediated endocytosis. Or the capsid proteins can undergo shape changes, creating a channel in the host membrane, and then the viral genome is injected, kind of like what we saw with bacteriophage T4, with the bacteriophage that infects E. coli bacteria. Now, enveloped animal viruses also have two ways of entering. They can enter by either receptor-mediated endocytosis or a process called fusion. The receptor-mediated endocytosis is very similar to how non-enveloped viruses enter, but fusion can only happen if the virus is enveloped, if it's surrounded by an envelope. So these viruses, which include HIV, use special fusion proteins in their envelopes to cause the envelope to fuse with the plasma membrane of the cell. And that releases the genome and the capsid of the virus into the cell. The envelope of the cell, the envelope of the virus does not enter, but the genome and the capsid of the virus does enter into the cytoplasm of the cell. Now, when we get infected with a virus, the infection can be acute or it can be chronic. And if you know what those terms mean, they mean the same thing here. Acute means that you get symptoms which get increasingly worse for a short period, and then the virus is eliminated from the body by the immune system, and we recover. Then you can have long-term chronic infections. Hepatitis C would be an example of that. You may have heard of people getting hepatitis C, and that is chronic hepatitis. And then there are infections that are asymptomatic. Some people who are infected with COVID-19 virus are actually asymptomatic. They're not showing any symptoms at all, which is one of the reasons that this virus is so difficult to contain. This is an example of, we've actually talked about this virus before, the varicella zoster virus. Make sure, I think I can spell it. Varicella zoster. Okay, the varicella zoster virus is the one that causes chicken pox, and that virus can remain latent in the host cell, which is a human cells, the host cells, for long periods of time, years actually, and then some kind of stress will cause the virus to reemerge and become active. And what we're looking at here in picture B is shingles, which is what happens in older people. Now, honestly, it normally happens in older people. I have a friend that I work with here at Wilson Community College whose son is a teenager, still in high school, who never had chicken pox, got the chickenpox vaccine and ended up with shingles as a teenager. And shingles is a very painful, blistering type of skin disease. It comes and goes. You don't, it has a period of time where you'll have it and you'll deal with it and then it'll go away. But and in no way am I trying to say that I'm against vaccines, because it's very rare that that happens. And vaccines are still our best way at the moment of preventing people from getting viruses. But there's always that rare exception, and he was one of those. So there are also viruses, oncogenic viruses, which actually are cancer causing. And you have probably heard about HPV because it has been many advertisements. You have seen probably many advertisements about it. HPV is human papillomavirus, and it is the virus, and I'm not going to spell the whole thing, but I'll spell papilloma. Human papillomavirus. And what it does, it causes genital warts in males and females. However, after the genital warts are treated and they go away, years later, a female can actually develop cervical cancer due to the virus presence in her body. Now, males cannot develop cervical cancer because males don't have a cervix, but a male can give a female HPV. So the vaccine for HPV is recommended for children of both sexes at age 11, and it's a two-cycle vaccine. You get one vaccine and then you come back, I think, in 6 months and you get the second cycle of it. Here are some human viruses. I won't go over every single one of them, but one that you hear a lot about is herpes. Herpes simplex type 1 is fever blisters. Herpes simplex type 2 is the STD herpes. Okay, as you can see down here in the STDs, the other two listed are HPV, human papillomavirus, and then, of course, HIV. A lot of your STDs are actually bacterial or fungal infections. Skin infections, we have the varicella zoster virus, which causes chickenpox. We do have a vaccine for that for children now. And that is the one that can lead to shingles later if you get chickenpox. So that vaccine will actually prevent chickenpox and shingles most of the time. There are a lot of different herpes viruses. There's herpes simplex 1, which is fever blisters, herpes simplex 2, which is genital herpes. There is a herpes simplex virus that causes an eye infection. I'm looking over here to see where all different ones are. There's a human herpes virus 6 that causes a skin infection. And those aren't the only ones. But another thing I wanted to point out is the viruses that can cause pneumonia, which is lower respiratory tract fluid buildup in the lungs. And that would be influenza viruses, types A and B. So those are flu viruses. And then adenoviruses, and then the SARS coronavirus. And the SARS coronavirus has several types, different types. One that caused an epidemic in 2002, 2003, and then the one we have right now, which is causing COVID-19. Hepatitis is always inflammation of the liver, and it can be caused by hepatitis virus types A, B, C, D, and E. Hepatitis is a symptom. It literally means inflammation of the liver, and it can also be caused by overdosing on certain medications, legal and illegal, and it can be caused by alcohol. But there is also viral hepatitis, which is the one that we hear the most about. The common cold is typically caused by a rhinovirus, but as you can see, parainfluenza and respiratory syncytial virus can also cause the common cold. And what did I say? Epstein. Okay, the pharyngitis is inflammation of the throat, and Epstein-Barr virus is the one that causes mononucleosis. And then you can also see that one type of coronavirus can cause gastroenteritis, which is inflammation of the GI tract. Sorry about that pause. Okay, so in plants do have cell walls, so damage to the plant cells has to happen before the virus can enter the host cell. This damage can be caused by weather, like wind and rain and hail, that kind of thing. It can be caused by insects, other animals that eat the plants, fire, or human activities. And you can also have plant offspring inheriting viral diseases from plant parents. But the only way that that can happen is if the virus infects the egg or the sperm of the parent. So it has to infect the sexual um, cells of the parent. Um, it says plant viruses can be transmitted by a variety of vectors through contact with an infected plant sap, by living organisms such as insects and nematodes. Nematodes are roundworms, and through pollen. When a plant virus is transferred from plant to plant, this is horizontal transmission. And when it is inherited from a parent plant, we call this vertical transmission. And viruses can be transmitted either way in plants. Some of the symptoms of plant viruses, remember, like hypo means lower and hyper means higher. So hyperplasia means like a growth, which we call a gall or a tumor. Sometimes you might see like a branch on a tree and it's got this growth on it, kind of attached to it. Almost looks like it's part of the branch, but it's just a bigger rounded part. That's called a gall. And hypoplasia is like meaning lower. That means that growth is affected in the opposite way. So you can have thinned yellow splotches on leaves, and the leaves won't be as large, um, and cell necrosis means death. So that's where you see dead, blackened stems, blackened leaves, blackened fruit, abnormal growth patterns like malformed stems, leaves, or fruit, and then discoloration. We saw some of all of that in the very first picture. Maybe this won't take too long to get back to. Remember the very first picture? We saw some of all of these symptoms in the orchid leaf that was infected by the TMV, the tobacco mosaic virus. Okay. All right, now I'm going to stop here, and then when we start back, we'll talk about vaccines, and then we'll move on into the coronavirus and COVID-19.